I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Port Over and Open Throat. Some of you may have heard about this novel, and some of you definitely have not heard about this novel. And I am laughing, and you are going to hear all of the reasons why, mostly because I'm also making fun of myself for not immediately saying to everyone in the world, oh yeah, this one. And I'm going to explain that comment in a second. Henry Hoke is the author of this dynamic, amazing, miraculous, tiny novella that is so voice driven. And if you are the kind of person who needs a narrator that you can hold on to and just follow, this is the book for you. And it's tiny, and we are going to get into the language and the structure. We are staying away from spoilers. And Jackson Howard is the editor for Open Throat. Jackson, what is your title at McD?
I'm an editor.
Okay. I didn't know if you had a fancy, I'm not good with titles. Anyway, we're going to talk about this wild little novella. And I guess technically I'm supposed to call it a novel, but it feels like a novella to me. So Henry, novel, novella, do you care?
It's a book.
It's a book. Yes, it is a book. It is a book.
It's got a story. Yeah. So that's all I care about.
All right. It's
Please,
beautiful.
Have
this
at
book,
it.
though. It is beautiful, this book. The voice is, I left a note, actually, I'm the queen of Post-its, and I stuck a Post-it on the front and dropped a copy off with someone I work with. And all I said was, it's the voice. And then I walked away. Jackson, why'd you buy this book? Henry wrote it, but you brought it into the world, and we're going to start there for a second.
Well, Henry's agent sent me an email, and the subject line was "Queer Mountain Lion?" ? I'm from LA, and this novel is set under the Hollywood sign. Mountain Lion's queer. Anyway, everything about this book, it was almost as if it was like an AI pitch bot sent it specifically to me. I just couldn't have found a more me sounding book. I read it in one sitting, which I don't think I've done with any other book on my list. It's a short book, as in saying it's voice driven. You kind of get it from the jump, and it's a premise that has the potential to become saccharine or kind of corny, and it never tips over to there. And I kept waiting as I was reading and enjoying this book to see if this was going to become, no pun intended, hokey. And sorry, but that was the only word I have for that. So I just needed to buy it right away. Okay. I was like, this pitch sells itself, and I basically have been using that email subject line to the book ever since.
Henry, you're not an Angelino. I know you lived in Los Angeles for a little bit, but
it's true. Yeah, I spent 11 years in Los Angeles. Yeah, and in a way, my big cat is not exactly an Angelino either.
Right. I know.
It crosses the freeways and has this slightly outsider perspective on everything. And I think that was key to finding the perspective that the voice would, play with. I felt both enamored and confused and overwhelmed by the city pretty much the whole time. Yeah.
I think Angelinos, we still sometimes feel that way as well. Not always, but sometimes. But did you start writing it when you came back to the East Coast? I mean, where does this fit into? You had to leave LA to write this book, right? Like, this is not.
Absolutely.
This feels like you need the distance. It feels like you need the space. It feels like you need to remember how it felt for you to land. In LA. That
was very true. Yeah, of how it came about was I had come back to New York, and it was right before the pandemic. Yeah. So New York was not as dynamic as I was anticipating. It was a whole different thing. Just really trying to process that time I spent in Los Angeles, which felt perpetual and dreamy and strange and wild and full of, pseudo-apocalyptic experiences. And a lot of hunger, hunger for various things, and a lot of sort of, disconnect from other people for various reasons. I knew I wanted a vehicle, a voice to process that time that wasn't just like a third person narrative or summing up of a scene or of an era. Like, all those things just didn't jump out at me. And I was like, but I had this urge probably to write about that time. It really was, when I heard a song by Nick Cave that mentions the cougar in the Hollywood Hills. And I was like, right, P-22, my old friend that I would always check up on, and was just up the hill from me in this house for a while, under a house. And I thought, well, that's the voice. And it was the most organic writing experience I've ever had. Every morning I was just ready and excited to write it. It didn't take any, I didn't have to distance myself from it. I just went right into that big cat feeling, and it flowed from there.
Yeah, it really, when you say flow, that's exactly the word. I mean, your prose just swings really hard on the page. There might be some people who are like, well, this is a little bit like poetry, and kind of sort of. It is very much its own form now, right? And you are playing with language in ways I was so impressed as I was reading. And the way you play with the idea of whether or not our narrator knows what language is and what it can do. And clearly, I keep calling him our narrator because I bought in entirely to having a novel narrated by a mountain lion. And, Jackson knows this, his publisher knows this. Animal narrators and I are just not usually what people think of when they're sending me something and pitching me something. I'm like, And yeah, I say that.
Yeah, me neither.
I loved Stuart Little as a kid, right? But I think I got to Narnia and I was like, Aslan, really? Like, this is a little heavy-handed. Like, I'm good, thanks. This works. The outsider structure works. The whole hunger metaphor, like, everything you do here works. And I'm raising an eyebrow only because it's a little bit of that, how'd you do it? And I really do want to talk about craft because it could have, as Jackson was just saying a second ago, it could have veered off in territory that I don't think any of us would have loved as much as we love this book now. So let's talk about process for a second, because we've set up sort of the idea of the thing, right? But you do some stuff in this book, man.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really funny to talk about. My process was really just concentrated. I pretty much just started writing from that inspiration moment. I was pitching my memoir that has, came out last year, and that I wrote for Bloomsbury for their object lesson series. And so I was sort of waiting to, that we were talking a little bit and I was sort of conceiving of some ideas there, but I knew that would be very like research heavy, going back into my, memories and my experiences as a youth, in my hometown of Charlottesville, Virginia, that's where that's where I grew up and all that was. So I sort of had this like book that I was going to cook when they signed me to write it, but I wasn't ready for that yet. So I was like, okay, but I would love to write something. I was just like, I just sort of need to get something out. And I'm not really like a short form writer. I'm a very short form writer in my approach, but I don't think too much about like short stories or like just putting little morsels out unless I'm sort of writing nonfiction for magazines or whatever. So I was really like, okay, well, this is going to be a book, no matter what form that takes. I'm like, it has to be a book because I thought this voice is going to want that kind of space. Because if it was short, I think, it is short, but if it was intended to be a short story or anthologized or a poem or a series of them, I was just like, I want to give this lion that, like, honor the voice, to give it a lot of space to spread out and to go on a real journey and sort of have a large scale adventure in a way, no spoilers, but yeah, because I feel like that would be the tribute to the real lion. And then also just to how much I wanted to express about Los Angeles. But the form was, I wrote it in sequence, but what would come to me would be these little, like you say, like lines and linguistic moments and play, and just some of the lines that, I still love to read, even though, I wrote it, and I'm not sick of it because it's a fun book, which is great. That's also part of why I did it, was I didn't want to get sick of my work. And I was like, well, let's write something that I'm going to enjoy. Which is not always the case. But here I thought, every day I would write, maybe I would hit that first line that came to me, and I would just go from there to the next one that I knew, the next moment that was linguistic. It wasn't so much plot points I was thinking about as like the way that Hecate is, what I call my lion, that Hecate would process and then make linguistic speak that line, that moment, right? So I was like, okay, like something like I'm old because I'm not dead. I'm like, okay, well, I want to get to that expression. And it's going to be this observation of an older, an old couple of humans and like how Hecate thinks about age. So I was like, okay, well, that'll just be an observation. But then other moments that were like larger, like plot point moments, like something like fire is the only future or something, that's going to be a dramatic moment, a turning point in the narrative that will get me to that line. So sort of writing toward the line, which is just sort of how things come to me. I have these little fragments I'll, journal on my phone or whatever. Yeah, like a poet, I guess, but then I'm building them into these larger structures.
You're not the first writer to have told me they were drafting their book. Chen Julie Wang actually drafted Beautiful Country on her phone. And she drafted her memoir on her phone as she was commuting to a job that, ultimately was not the job she stayed in. But You hear these stories and I'm like, we walk around with supercomputers in our pockets. This is pretty great. But Jackson, I want to talk to you about editing because, I mean, you don't want to take away what Henry's done, but the reality is everyone needs an editor. Like I don't care who you are, you need someone to look at the thing and make sure that you haven't just decided to embrace all of the things. We all get attached to, I certainly get attached to pieces of copy, and my editor will come to me and be like, you can't have that. You just can't have that. It's just goofy.
And how do you react to being edited?
I honestly, I let her take it out because, I mean, I know there's always something in there where it's like, yeah, okay, that sounded great the first time I said, yeah, just let it go. But you don't want to lose the shape of the thing, right? You don't want to lose the form. You don't want to lose the narrative momentum, because that's one of the things, Henry, you do in this book. It never stops. And it's wild to me how much, okay, and now it's my turn to apologize for how much ground you cover in this tiny, tiny book, right? With Hecate walking around doing Hecate's things, and Hecate has some adventures that we're not going to get too deep into, but you cover a lot of territory, and not all of it is Griffith Park.
True. Yeah. Some surprises.
Yeah, Jackson, talk about editing this thing, because again, you don't want to mess it up, but you do want to put a little edge to it, right?
I mean, as an editor, when I sign a book up, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, I have to make sure that not only that the author and I are on the same page for my vision, but that already there's the potential of trust. Not that it's assumed, but there's potential of trust to the point that as we develop our relationship and I ask to do things, whether that's sometimes change the title, sometimes that's kill a character, all the classic editing things, that this author is going to trust me. And in the case of this book, I mean, it is such a delicate book. It holds itself up in so many ways. And I knew when I read it that it was not going to be a heavy lift, because as you were saying, Miwa, it keeps going. That doesn't stop. And a book this sensitive and kind of original and a place of storytelling, it easily could just be very navel-gazing and we never leave the sun. And the way I actually pitched it to my boss, I was like, yes, this is narrated by a mountain lion and there was no punctuation, but you have to understand that within this is actually a very cinematic, familiar, universal story of, coming of age and community and loss and all these things. And so once I feel like I had a grasp on the actual meat of the book, which is those kind of elements I was saying, the more universal aspects, I knew that we just had to fit the rest of the book around that. So I really didn't. We only did, I think, one round on this book. Henry's a pro. He's so intentional with his language, and that was the other thing I really wanted to make sure for myself. It was just like I almost had to put on, gloves before editing this book, because as an editor, I'm never trying to turn a book into something that it already isn't, especially fiction. This book in particular, I was like, let me not muck up this beautiful canvas. And I think, here and there was maybe a line or two I felt, whether it was repetitive or it felt extra, but I actually didn't really cull anything outside of, we added a couple pages before the ending just to kind of give us a breather in a lot of ways and cut some other stuff.
I actually understand exactly where you are in the book when you're saying, I know the pages you're talking about.
For the climax, we kind of slowed down. And I remember one edit that I felt kind of self-conscious about giving to Henry, which is that there's so many of these lines that are one-liners that people could and probably will get tattooed like on their body.
I actually think there's going to be a whole run of people
going to open throat tattoos.
Without a doubt. I absolutely think that's going to happen.
And it'll be next to another hilarious line that observes something about therapists or sex or whatever. But there are these lines that kind of knocked me sideways and fun to me. And I just remember asking Henry, like, hey, if you could slip in a couple other one-liners that kind of encompass the feeling of being a human in the universe and something that we can all relate to that's really instantly memorable, that would be awesome. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, you can't force magic to happen like that. But I think Henry took the edit well. And I didn't have to do basically anything with this book. It came basically perfect. So.
Yeah. And Henry, you've written plays, right? So, I mean, dialogue and movement, that is something that's sort of innate to your piece of the craft, right? I know you said you always knew this was going to be a book. You always knew Open Throat was going to be a book, but like there's stuff you know from the other bits of your life as a writer that I think translate here in a way that actually made me trust you even more. I think because I was like, okay, all right, here we go. And I read Open Throat in a single sitting on a flight. And it was just kind of the perfect reading experience because you can focus, and the rewards are all there. I'm like, I think I've marked up every single, yeah, actually, I have marked up it. This is my now destroyed galley because why not? But
Please destroy away.
yeah, right. I mean, so here's the thing. Writing is an act of communion. Reading is an act of communion. Like putting all of this stuff on the page, you're trusting your editor's trusting you. Like there are all of these human moments to making a book. Right?
Yeah.
Like all of the stuff that you can't really necessarily control. You kind of hope you get the right team. It doesn't always happen.
No, and I absolutely got the right team. I mean, I think what was so magical about working with Jackson was as you say, like this book, like the propulsive quality of this book, and that it keeps going and going, and that was really how I wrote it, with this fluidity and this momentum, just to keep, because I was every day I was getting up. I mean, every like weekday or whatever, I would get up and write for 3 hours, and very slowly in a way, but really getting the pages and getting the moments and the lines. Because I always wanted to I ended every writing session with something I was like yeah, like that I get to sort of like, okay, that cooked, like that's done. I hit that beat that makes me feel satisfied and ready for the next day. But then I would leave it on all these cliffhangers. But what Jackson really helped me do in editing, and it would, really, as he says, like delicate notes, the thoughtful, like aware of like my syntax and like what meant a lot to me in the story, but was let me take a breath, build more space around it, step away for a moment, step outside of, not outside of the voice, but outside of the very visceral moments that the cat is experiencing. And that was amazing. And it helped a lot with, especially, I can't wait, I'm going to read the scene this week at the Center for Fiction, but where we were shuffling like a little bit of, reverie and flashback into the current moment and how those moments would work. We did a lot of work with those for pacing. And I think that was all stuff that I couldn't see in the full, ongoing flow, but that was just beautiful to work on in the drafting for publication. Yeah. I worked in film, I wrote films, I made films, I've written theater, because I really am a book writer now. Like that's just what I want to do. And, we'll see what I need to do for, financial needs, but, and what opportunities come, which is all exciting. But I think that, but I really love to write books because I can bring all these other elements of what I've done in the past into this. And I'm not writing plays or movies, like, and I haven't for a very long time. I've just focused on books. And so, especially with the dialogue, I really loved like giving that just like completely idiosyncratic Los Angeles like characters and voices, just giving them these like rich moments. And that's all you get. You get them hiking by once. And I was like, yeah, there's a whole play in just these two characters that I show for 2 pages. Like I wanted to have that fullness with what Hecat's encountering, so that like the cat has a lot to chew on from humans. It's like, well, wow, there's like a lot going on in that relationship that Hecat's just witnessed, but we don't get to see it. All we get is speculation, but we get that concentrated dialogue. I always wanted that really overheard strangeness that you would get in a play, where you just dropped in and you keep living with those characters. But I would shortcut them just so I tease everything, right? Yeah, that was sort of my crafting there.
It's really intimate what you do, and it's intimate in a way that if your characters knew how they were being eavesdropped upon, I think they would be mortified. But of course, for us, it's very much fun. It's great. It is so great. But I want to talk about influences for a second, because both of you are coming into books. It's much easier, right, to find queer writers. It's much easier to be part of a queer community. It is much easier. When I was first coming up through booking, we had sort of the same things you always had kind of thing, right? Like it was a very small set of writers and books and whatnot. And it's so exciting to see like this entire new generation flourishing and being like, well, I can pull from whatever I feel like pulling. Maybe it's sci-fi, maybe it's, romance, whatever. I don't care. Just write all of the things. But I do want to talk about some of your literary influences. Both Jackson as an editor and a reader and Henry both as a writer and a reader, because they're not always the same, right? Like they're not always, you look to different writers for different things. And maybe they're not all queer, but you guys are part of this up and coming new generation. I sort of want to put some guardrails out there for folks who maybe aren't immediately part of this conversation. Who's going to start?
Jackson, you start.
Okay. Taste is such an intangible, weird thing. It's something I'm always growing and learning, and my taste changes as a reader and as an editor constantly. When I came out of college as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed English major, I was like, I just gotta be amongst words all the time. And then you realize, you have to learn how to bring those words to people and hopefully get people paid for those words. And all that to say is, threading the needle between the market and what readers are looking for versus elevating the voices that you think deserve to be out there, and then finding the audiences for those new types of voices. It's what makes my job so engaging and challenging and fun. And in terms of, queer literature, it's a huge part of my list. It's a huge part of my life. As an editor, the books that, if I have to describe my authors in one word, I really like to say uncompromising. And specifically with my queer writers, you look at somebody like Brontez, I'm super close to, and we did 100 Boyfriends. And that book is uncompromising in its depiction of Black gay life in Oakland. And it's funny and it's raunchy and it's sexy and it is so complex. And I can also look at Sarah Schulman's History of ACT UP, which I published. And she was like, this book needs to be 750 pages. I said, okay, it does. Because that's the story that hadn't been told before. And so I think that is what really excites me about Henry's book, which is, as I said, it was never going to be anything that it wasn't already. And so you look at some of the writers I admire, like Andrea Lawler, for example, or, and Alex Chee. And these are the queer writers I look up to, whose taste, again, is you can't influence it. It is always going to be unapologetically what it is. And especially for a generation above me of queer writers, like you were saying, Miwa, there weren't many. And a lot of the reason also for cis gay male writers is many of them got sick and died. And so in a way, we're actually getting to repopulate the canon with these newer uncompromised voices. And it's just awesome. And a book that Andrea and I read, which I gave to everybody, called Such Times by Christopher Coe, C-O-E. And Andrea and I have kind of been reading these out of print queer books together, because I reissued Imogen Binnie's Nevada, which in my opinion is the most uncompromising queer novel. This book by Christopher Coe, it broke my heart because it had blurbs, it had reviews, the prose was out of this world, and it was wiped off the face of the earth because a year after it came out, he died of AIDS, and it was just gone. And so all this to say is that queer writers have been doing this, and now we're in a position where, in theory, it's a slightly better world in some ways, and just in the sense that I also feel like straight readers or non-queer readers are way more open to reading other experiences. And that, to me, makes me really happy that my queer books, first and foremost, I want those readers to be seen, but it's so cool to me when a book like Detransition Baby, which I love, is such an amazing book, is being read in a book group of, straight cis moms. That is awesome. So to have that crossover while still keeping it 100% gay as hell, that is, I feel like, the dream and the promise of what decades of queer literature has been bringing us to.
Okay, I need someone to bring back Essex Hempel's poems, though. They're out of
okay.
print.
We'll talk about that offline.
Someone needs to fix that, please. I need those back, because I very foolishly loaned a copy to someone, and it has, of course, never come back.
No, can't do that.
And no, usually I'm okay about lending stuff. It's just that's the one where I'm like, really? I had to loan that one.
My original copy of Nevada is under lock and key.
Okay.
You cannot find it for that reason.
Henry?
Yeah. No, I'm so grateful for Jackson and what Jackson does. And immediately, just when we connected, to talk about this book, I was like, oh, I know Brontez, and I know and the Schulman book, is an incredible work archive, and I think that I was like, oh, this is amazing. I can see their vision for what they're bringing into the world. It was like, sort of my privilege to be connected to Queer Lit was that I went to Cal Arts a little over a decade ago for my MFA, and it was sort of I ended up there because my partner went there for acting, and I was like, oh, they have a really interesting creative writing program. It's not like anything that I would think of applying to. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll be a book person because I'm so sick of being a film person. I loved queer cinema, and I, like grew up, working in a video store and connecting to that in my hometown. My mentor was Matthias Wegner, who's an incredible writer. And, and through Matthias, like reading Kathy Acker, who, Matthias manages her estate and her work, and then Maggie Nelson, another professor of mine, and just connecting through them and people they would bring in, meeting Eileen Miles, and someone who I'd heard about since I was listening to Hot Topic by La Tigra, and I was like, and I'd read so much of their poetry, but then just like getting to dialogue with them around when they put out Inferno, and then Michelle T came through, just an incredible amount of amazing writers who now I feel like I'm excited to be in community with, or just sharing this work with, especially thanks to Jackson and others, to share my own work with them. It just opened my eyes to more than, I think, as Jackson says, uncompromising and the singularity of because I think there's like, I'm a bisexual and I'm genderqueer, and I sort of have this experience of like, I'm not part of like, I was never part of like a monolithic or specific exact scene of writing or of narrative, but I love how concentrated queer books are, because they're so purposeful and they're depicting things that aren't the norm and they're outside of that. To meet these people and to read their work and to have them talk about their work through CalArts and through also just the Los Angeles community, and so the sort of things, the event series I built was just a wonderful way to see the singularity of all these voices and to see how much they were bringing to the table to dynamize, can be a very, I think, a very homogenous literary approach. I mean, no matter what, and even across, voices, there's often like a way to write a book or a way to craft fiction that I just never really felt was ever going to be me. I used to joke I would never write a novel. And in a way, I don't think I really have written like novels. Like, as you say, like I write these other things that are.
Hey, it says novel on the cover.
Yeah,
okay?
Henry,
yes.
no, it's,
Yes,
I mean, I'd argue novel versus novella, but no,
but novella, that's,
and the whole novella thing. I mean,
I love honestly, the word.
It's a great word, but also, novels can be lots of different lengths. Just saying.
I think so. Well, the way I think about it is like, as I said, I wanted to give this cat a book. Like I wanted this cat to be writing a book, not like I am a cat writing a book, of course. And that's part of what I navigate, is it's never like a cat declaring their place. It's finding something strange about identity. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know the expression. They don't even know that they can speak. They can't. But the idea of like, a novel is like, this for a big cat, it's a novel. It was a lot to write to express all this. So I kept thinking about that voice and what that brings. I was out to dinner with just some friends, and I was with Richard Hell, the musician and poet, now poet and memoirist, and he was like, "I love how you kids get away with writing these slim books and calling them a novel." And I was like, "Well, Richard, it's your fault. Like you did that to culture. Like you brought punk into our lives. So like we're gonna call things novels that people don't think are,
Well, and I mean, Kathy Acker is kind of one of the ultimate punk writers, right? Like Pussy King of the Pirates, when I think about it, and certainly like all of the early stuff, she just burned everything to the ground and was like, "Hi, I'm going to do my own thing." And I mean, when she was good, she was great.
And I think that was really that's my hope for the lineage that I'm carrying is just people that were uninterested in trends or even form as a stuck or codified thing that you have to meet, especially in order to be like marketable or whatever. And that's what I'm just so grateful to Jackson as a general, editor and acquirer of books. And of course, specifically mine, of course, I'm very grateful. But just what Jackson chooses and elevates is absolutely not expected. And so much of it is people that I love and think are amazing, but maybe haven't gotten the level of exposure that MCD and FSG can give. And I think giving that prestige to these really dynamic or unique voices, unexpected voices, it's a calling, and it's something that you do amazingly, Jackson. So I'm in awe of that approach.
It's fun. And I think, I've probably told you, I mean, Ira Silverberg is definitely my blueprint for a lot of this. And the books that he was responsible for, Acker and Burroughs and Dennis Cooper, and the way that, but it was a different way. Grove's exceptional house, but he was working from the margins in a lot of ways, working so hard, and also genuinely probably not even caring that much if they made it to the middle in some ways. But his job as an editor was that he was able to stay uncompromising while still giving these people, attention. And now I feel like that's the spirit I am trying to bring with me, is how he used to do that. I ask him questions all the time about how the hell he did it.
I think sometimes he knows. Sometimes he knows, and sometimes it was magic. But if you're going to be uncompromising, you've got to have that voice, though. You've got, if there is no voice to hang this on, there's no point in being uncompromising. And when you talk about the Eileen Miles and the Kathy Ackers and the Dennis Coopers and whatnot, there is a voice there. There is a point of view. There is voice, absolutely like the thing that hooks you in, and you're just like, I guess I'm going along. Okay, here I am. And that's the kind of gorgeous beauty of the thing, right? Like literature should challenge us. Stories should challenge us. Like, when we're little kids and we're learning to read, and it's like, please read me the same picture book 97 times, preferably in one night, right? Like we've all, I was that kid saying, hi, can someone please read this? And then once you learn to read, you're like, boom, boom, boom. Or you're rereading stuff. And I don't have the luxury of rereading the way I used to. But at the same time, like there is so much joy, right? When you go back and you find something and you're like, oh, right, I remember how great this was. And then there are other things where you're like, wow, this was of a time and of a place, and I do not need to have this in my life again. And I just love that you can do this and see this, right? Especially with what Henry's doing in Open Throat. Like there's a landscape of Los Angeles, right, that shouts out a little bit of Hubert Selby, right? Even though he's not, like, I know I'm talking about Brooklyn, but there's a little bit of that lineage there, right? There's a little bit of Fonte, like all of these sort of gritty landscape people. And you're doing it. But I want to talk about place. I want to talk about place for a second, because Los Angeles can be unwieldy and it can be unmanageable. And I sent so many copies of this galley to a bunch of booksellers, obviously at our store at the Grove, because I'm just like, it's P22, like, y'all, here you go. And it's more than P22, but it's nice to be able to say, you guys, of all the people in the world, like, let's start with you, and then we'll go from there. But LA is a metaphor, LA is a place, LA is the thing, right? Like you mapped a city, and what is this, 155 pages? And I don't even know what the word count is because there's lots of white space. So 156 pages.
Yeah.
But how do you map a place, right? How do you sit down and map the emotional terrain of a place?
Yeah, I think that it really was an inside out approach. I probably, the most surprising thing about crafting this book was how much I was able to cover about things I view in Los Angeles. And again, with a concentrated quality, right? It's, with that finesse and that style of my way of writing, where I'm not exhaustive. I am very much not exhaustive, but in a way I was like, well, part of it is that even getting these small, ferocious bits of the cat's experience, they were real flashpoints for connecting with things like inequality, things like encroaching urbanity on natural spaces, things like apocalyptic interruptions to life, from fire to earthquake to flood, the things that I was experiencing, but imagining other people, and especially animals and and unhoused people, experiencing much more acutely. Really, that's sort of the beats of the book, was to write toward each of these kind of just ruptures in sort of a daily life, and in a complacent, confused, overwhelmed human life. These things don't, they can just sort of be blips, but for the cat, it's each one's monumental and shifting and changes their whole psyche in some moments.
Yeah, but you also have a way of writing about money, not class. I'm not talking about, I am talking literally about money, where suddenly you can see this entire world unfold, right? Like who has access to what and when and where we are physically in place, because it's a hard thing to do, right? Like, yes, you are covering, those who have housing and those who do not. But money is different. Money is different. And there's one line actually where the cat is trying to figure out, someone has actually dropped cash on the ground. And he's like, well, I know that's important. I know people want that. And I should go take it. And it doesn't taste like anything. Like what? It's what, 4 lines? 5?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Pretty much, yeah.
It happens in, I don't know, 30 seconds, depending on how fast you read. And stuff like that pops up. And there's a sort of youngish girl, late teens, early 20s, who pops into the story later, and she's a big part of that whole money piece and the way you write about money and the access to that and whatnot. You really did need to step outside of humanity in order to be able to tell the story about us, right? Like, it just was not going to happen another way. Like, when I think of how you write about money and access and power and family and love and all of that, you weren't going to be able to do it unless you did this, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I think place is incredibly important to me in my books. Like my memoir is, about my hometown of Charlottesville, Virginia, and all the complexities of like racial violence and the history of it, and also just like what it is to grow up and be connected to a hometown. In that book, I do it through 20 stickers, like that's it. I think finding an absurd core, a kernel of the absurd, in order to reflect absurd being like, how do you sum up a book in, a town in 20 stickers? How do you sum up a childhood in 20 stickers? And then in this, it's like, like ordering the world through human language and through a lot of like human, both foibles and disasters, that's the way to see it for me. I was like, like that's the way in, to be without. Yeah. Making sense of money by saying like, well, I've seen people drop it and get upset that they dropped it. And like, so it has value, right? And like, I know that, so, bringing it to the encampment of unhoused people, like, cause like they'll do something with this because it doesn't taste like it's in my mouth and I can't taste it. I can't eat it. This is nothing. Because this cat is learning about a human world, it can be reflected as absurd. Later on, I'll just tease that there's a potential, like a domestication situation. And that it shows the absurdity of space and of housing and, and of the greenery even of Los Angeles. For this wild animal, it's like, this isn't natural. Like, this doesn't make sense, And I think that I've certainly felt that all the time. You feel the dryness, you feel the scarcity, which is, 2 words as my cat hears it. It's scarcity is the place, honestly, more than which it is LA.
That device works. Yeah, that device really works.
Yeah, that meant something to me because I was like, it's a place that's defined by lack and by a massive inequality of resources, like, and I think, living in my small apartment and, I'm a quite privileged person, especially like in the scale of Los Angeles. And, I'm living there, but I'm not from there, but I'm living in the small apartment and I'm driving to like my therapist and I'm driving through like Beverly Hills, and I'm just like, this is bizarre. Like, for anyone, especially someone like me, to still feel like there are these astronomical verticalities of wealth and then of what your world is because of your wealth. I was like, well, this cat is going to be, coming from a cave, with very little to eat, eating bats, and then is going to be in, as P22 was, like living under a house in Los Feliz, like an incredibly, high income area, like right by Griffith Park, those houses. And so I was like, well, this is a way to map this place and to map the strange way I encountered it. Yeah.
Jackson, you grew up in LA. I know you recognized this LA the minute you read this book, because you and I have sort of talked about this offline, but you're a displaced Angelino. You left. You're here in New York. You miss it?
Man, yeah, I miss it. I'm a 3rd generation Angelino. All of my family is there, like every person. So it's quite controversial that I'm not there amongst my family. I do miss it, but I really think about Less Than Zero a lot. The bread smell as well.
Yeah.
Which has some of the types of vibes I grew up in, and he has that whole spiel about it's almost like the echoing Didion a little bit about the like there is no center to LA. Like you just drive around and around in circles, and so more so than a place like New York that maybe it embraces you, maybe it kind of slaps you around, but you're in it. And LA, you can visit and not know where the hell you are the whole time. And so all that to say is I feel like at this stage in my creative and personal life, this is where I need to be. But of course I miss it. I really miss also the connection to nature. And that's something I love how you explore that in the book, Henry, too. But it's a different thing. Even on the beach with 1 million people, you still feel like you're part of something slightly wild. And it's hard to get that feeling from me here as much. Even when I see like a rat run across my shoe, it doesn't feel as wild as Big Sur or something like that.
Yeah, but and I know you just mentioned Big Sur, but that wildness to me, that, that's San Diego is not wild.
Right.
It's
right.
the Santa Monica Mountains and sort of that in between coast right before you get up to Ventura. Ventura is still pretty wild too. But I have a center to my LA, but it's been very deliberate, right? Like I have built a thing, and like my LA is not the West Side, right? It's just my LA is what it is, and I love it, and it is a huge part of how I see the world. But you have to build the thing, right?
Yeah, and so our line is looking for that center, and that's why it's a fun device to use this line to understand, because it's a case of wherever he goes, there he is, and it's hard to actually have a statement about anything in the city except that there's nothing to say at all. So I thought in that way it captures the LA I know, and it made me a little wistful, but my mom has tried and failed enough to guilt me to come back, and now I think she's given up.
But wait, have either of you ever done the hike up behind the Hollywood sign? When you dip around the reservoir and head up through the back, and then you sort of end up on the back side of the sign? Have you ever done that?
I have never.
Okay, Jackson, you need to do it. You need it because it's a little vigorous, and if you're doing it like in the middle of the day, you earn your workout. But I don't think I'm ever going to be able to stop thinking about open throat every time I do that hike. Right?
Should have done
like
Here I
am,
like. Never mind the rattlesnakes, never mind the other mountain lions. It's just like, oh, great. Now I'm walking around thinking about my mountain lion having an existential crisis because, that's what our art is supposed to do, right? Like our art is supposed to make us think about the choices we make and how we approach the world. And Henry, you really made me care so much about this mountain lion because, again, I got attached to the voice. And I think that voice is just... I actually don't want to know how you did it. I just want to sit with it because it's so good. I don't want to pick it apart. I don't want to pick it apart. I just want it to be. I just want
I can say
friend's
it is.
life.
Yeah, it really was. It was just, it's my voice. It is my voice. Like, that's what's so interesting about it. And talking about like finding it like the center and I was like, yeah, like I inhabited a similar space to P22. Like I just would walk out of my house and sort of I'm not, I have sort of a disability, so I don't hike vigorously, but I push myself to reach a spot in the Franklin Hills or to get up into Los Feliz. I can be at the observatory in about 40 minutes from my door, walk straight and just walking up through the hills and on the staircases. And this was like my experience of wildness. And during that time, it was pretty much the same era that P22 had crossed the 405 and was there. And I always was like, okay, well, I'm not alone. There's this like big cat spirit here around me and potentially lurking. And even on my visit to Los Angeles last year to launch the memoir, I heard that the cat had been spotted in Silver Lake where I was staying. Like, so it was just I was like, okay, this is the time that I'll encounter it. But really it really was just my ordering of space and my voice. All I did was just like channel my old, vicious house cat from when growing up and was like, okay, what did she eat? She liked bats. She was bloodthirsty.
Bat snacks. In this case, bat snacks.
Lots of bat snacks. And that was one of Jackson's like hard check marks in the edit was like bat snack. Yes.
I give a lot of affirmation in my editing.
Okay.
It's a beautiful thing to do. It was very special to have like yes or like yum. Yeah.
Well, I'm also just glad you weren't Kiki. And you two know what I'm talking about when I say I'm glad you weren't Kiki, and other people can find
Kiki.
out.
Yeah.
Oh, poor Kiki.
Yeah. Kiki. And that happened for real. That was another real plot point. Yeah. So when you see it, you'll just know that was an occurrence that I read about and felt very conflicted about.
That was tough.
Hey, so what's next for the two of you? Are we going to see another Henry Hoke, Jackson Howard production?
I'm waiting. I don't know what's coming next. You got to ask the writer.
Yeah.
Well, I'm asking both of you.
Yeah. Well, I'm working on something. I'm very excited about it. I think, it was a little bit, again, I wrote my memoir under contract after I'd finished Open Throat. So it was sort of, I had that wild journey of completely changing tack. That was a very hard book to write. I still had a lot of fun with it, and it's very concentrated and, succinct, but it was a tough book to write with all the research and engagement with, wild political times during the pandemic. I wrote it over the pandemic, essentially, right after I'd finished Open Throat. So it took me a little while to get back into a new voice, and I've found it. Like, I found the voice. I have the story, and I'm building it. I'm writing a Southern Gothic book, so it's exciting. Yes, so because it's just time. I need to write my
It's
Southern
time.
Gothic expression.
Yeah, Mr. Hoke, it is time. It is absolutely time for you.
Because I'm very Southern, by my background and my upbringing, even deeper Southern than Virginia. But it's an Alabama novel, and it's going to be fun. Yeah, I know that Brontez is also doing an Alabama novel, so I'm very excited about that as well. Yeah, so I'm excited about that work, and I absolutely, of course, want to share it with Jackson. I think that how could I not?
You actually have to. So,
but coming soon,
I will be reading it.
Yes, give me 5 months, and let me come down from all this summer touring, and I'm ready to get back into a voice. And I think I found a really exciting voice to write in. It's also a bit natural, so that's fun. That's just a teaser.
Okay, we can be patient. It's okay. We can just we can reread Open Throat. It's 156. It's very fast paced. Very fast.
It'll hold you over. Yeah.
All right, Henry Hoke, Jackson Howard, thank you so much for joining us on Poured Over. Open Throat is out now, and you can just read it and reread it and keep going back. Thanks, guys.
Thank
you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.